All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Ethical Consumer Podcast. I am here with Audrey Tran Lam, and though she does not directly work with food, crafting food, she works very directly with those that grow the ingredients for our food. So, welcome, Audrey.
Hi, Julia.
Thanks for hopping on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am actually a huge fan of the podcast, so I'm really
Oh,
excited to share the platform with you.
thank you. That's really exciting to me. I just got goosebumps and a little emotional, so thanks for
You're
that.
welcome.
Well, friends, Audrey works at the CEEE building, if you are familiar with Cedar Falls and the University of Northern Iowa, if you've perhaps been on their campus before. And Audrey, tell me a little bit about what you do there. What is your title?
I am the Environmental Health Program Manager at the CEEE, and I've been there since the end of 2017. So just over 2 years now, I've been working there in various capacities in environmental health programming. I really like to describe my work as the overlap between ecological sustainability and human health. And prior to my joining the staff, there wasn't quite an emphasis as we have now on the human health aspect of sustainability.
Excellent. So, was this program created recently then, or did you step into this role that was vacated?
Oh, no, it was there was a grant that the center had acquired, and they needed a staff person to sort of run those programs. And so I stepped in as a new position. So environmental health at the CEEE started sort of when I joined staff there.
Okay, excellent. So you not only were an addition to the program, but the program was added on basically specifically so someone like you could come in and bridge that gap.
So that's the gift and the curse of being a grant funded university employee, right?
Sure.
You can write your own job description, but then on the other hand, you have to write your own job description.
Oh my gosh.
So I get to do things that are really, important to me that I'm really, really passionate about. But then there's that, sticky soft funding situation. But so far, we've been having a lot of luck attracting funders to the efforts that we're working on through the CEEE in environmental health. And I've just been so lucky to be at the CEEE.
Excellent. So we know where you are today. Where did you come from? What was your journey to UNI and this position?
Oh man, I love this question because I think that it sort of uh, highlights the Brownian motion of everyone's career trajectory.
Oh
You
yeah.
never end up where you think you're going to end up. So I graduated from Luther College in 2013. So my undergrad degree was in environmental science and sociology. And from there, I did a 2 year term with Green Iowa AmeriCorps, which is one of the AmeriCorps programs hosted out of the CEEE, actually. But my focus out of Luther and in Green Iowa was like environmental stewardship from an energy conservation point of view. I was very climate change focused. I was very climate policy focused. Carbon in the atmosphere. What is it doing to the environment? Right. A very ecocentric approach, and I didn't really consider or evaluate the human health impacts of our changing climate. But when I was working as an AmeriCorps service member in Cedar Rapids at my host site at Matthew 25, I had the opportunity to work on the urban farm at Matthew 25. And that's when I started really putting some pieces together about how land, environment, food, farming, and human health are all related in climate to climate. And then from there, I decided that I wanted to go back to school. And because of where my interests were sort of, I don't know, coagulating around food farming and human health, I thought, well, public health makes a lot of sense, right?
Sure.
This seems very, very public health related. So I started a master's in public health at the University of Iowa and immediately found a position at the CEEE after I graduated. So it was perfect.
Excellent. So
Yeah.
your life, your collegiate career, really, you've done everything that would be required for this job. So you were kind of perfect for it.
Thank you. And you don't realize sort of what puzzle that you're building with the pieces that you're acquiring along the way. And so when I stepped into this role at the CEEE, I realized I was able to step back and see this constellation of puzzle pieces that was forming this picture for me. And I was, oh, this makes sense. I feel very, very at home at the CEEE here.
Excellent. I like that analogy with all of the puzzle pieces were kind of starting to come out, and then you're like, hey, they do fit.
Yeah, you don't know what picture you're assembling until you have enough of them.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So true. So with the CEEE, you've mentioned a couple programs that are there. You said you took part in the Green Iowa AmeriCorps program. And then you work with the environmental health initiatives as well. Tell me a little bit more about some of the other programs that are offered at the CEEE, and then we'll get into your program.
Sure. So the center, it's such a magical place. The center, it primarily focuses on, climate change and environmental education. And so in addition to the two programs that you've already mentioned, we also have community energy and climate action programming where communities across the state can get help with their own climate action planning, sort of like regional or local Paris Climate Accords, right?
Okay.
So they can set targets to reduce their community's contribution to, or emissions. And then we have the UNI Local Foods Program, which I think the center is pretty well known for. And then, like you had mentioned, my environmental health programming that includes Good Neighbor Iowa and Farming for Public Health.
Excellent. And Good Neighbor Iowa, that one is a little bit, I think most people are more familiar with that, or you at least see, perhaps if you're in our area, the little yard signs. Is that correct?
Yes, the little Good Neighbor Iowa lawn signs. So our environmental health programs, they are, in my mind, statewide public health initiatives. Good Neighbor Iowa is a little bit more urban focused.
Sure.
So we do a lot more outreach in urban centers, trying to increase the visibility of unnecessary pesticide application and the good neighbors who are choosing to eschew that common and a little bit harmful practice of spraying pesticides on their lawn. And that is actually the Good Neighbor Iowa program manager is the role that I first stepped into. That was the foot in the door into the CEEE for me. And where I was able to really put some of my public health campaign experience to action.
Okay.
And then from there, I transitioned into, working on more broad programming, like the Farming for Public Health initiative.
Sure. So Good Neighbor Iowa, which is, individual specific, kind of morphed into this new position for you dealing with farms and agriculture as opposed to just like a single person or family and their lawn.
Right. And so in my, journey to the CEEE, food farming, land use, chemical inputs, these were all ideas that were sort of swirling around in my head and all things that I wanted to explore more deeply. In my career, in my, academic pursuits, in my personal life, right, there's just something that was really, really interesting to me. As I sort of grew into my role at Good Neighbor Iowa, I was able to have a lot more conversations about pesticide use more broadly in the state, not just in an urban setting, with our center director, Dr. Kamyaran Cheyenne. And we realized very, very quickly we had a shared interest in, more agricultural, pesticide application as well. And so, we sort of put our heads together to think about how we could be addressing this issue of chemical application and exposure in Iowa from these agricultural sources. And that's really where Farming for Public Health was born. The mere fact that we were only able to, with Good Neighbor Iowa, to address pesticide application on an urban scale, but knew that we had to really scale that up to consider the full, breadth of pesticide usage in the state.
Sure. So the program that you work for then, Farming for Public Health, that is located at the CEEE. And do you have programs there, or do you go to farms?
So sorry, Julia, you cut out just a little connection.
Oh, that's okay. So your program, Farming for Public Health, They are located at the CEEE, but do you do most of your work there, or do you do most of your work out in the fields?
Mm. Well, our plan of action has changed a little bit since COVID, right?
Sure.
Um, so farming for public health, just so your listeners are familiar with our mission, we're really seeking to highlight upstream solutions and strategies to, a whole host of cascading environmental health impacts across the state. And maybe I should even back up a little bit more about why this is a perspective that we're trying to um, uh, like highlight for Iowans. And it's a very, very public health based perspective, seeking these upstream solutions. Um, Public health is a field that is focused on prevention rather than a cure, right? So we are
Sure.
trying to prevent folks from becoming sick or from problems from occurring in the first place. Primary prevention.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, how do I explain this? So my favorite public health analogy is public health practitioners are turning off the faucet before you mop up the floor, right? And so when we
Love
think about
it.
land-based solutions to environmental health issues, you really have to go to the faucet, right? What is the
Mm-hmm.
source? And in Iowa, we see a lot of environmental health impacts originating at an agricultural scale, right? So we are through Farming for Public Health, seeking to highlight the solutions that are already there, that are already being practiced, that are profitable, and that really don't impact productivity in any way, right? So we're just falling back on agronomic, ecological practices that have been used for, forever, and have been backed up by research.
So it's almost like you're dialing back the clock. And pesticide use is not, a brand new thing, but they've been used over the past, I don't know, 20, 30 years or so in order to have quote unquote hardier crops or have more quantity of crops. And what you're trying to explore and influence is dialing it back to when pesticides were not used as much and what tools and what methods were used prior to heavily laden pesticides. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Sure, exactly. So we really want to remind everyone, just everyday Iowans, farmers, public health practitioners, researchers, that we have a much bigger toolbox to be addressing these, chemical input issues, these runoff issues, the soil loss issues, than what it is that's currently being practiced. We're using I would say that we're using a very narrow set of tools to, be treating the land currently.
Okay. And we actually, so I think you might have listened to this too, or it was on your queue. One of our previous guests, Eric Jensen from Yellowtail
Yeah.
Farm. Love Eric. So that
Mm-hmm.
episode was kind of centered around how he farms. And though he is not a certified organic farm, he is taking those measures, kind of like you indicated, of no-till farming, not breaking up the soil and good bacteria network, and he's not flooding his land with a bunch of pesticides, and he actually his farm is pretty close to a couple of our major rivers as well, so he is not adding to that pollution of pesticides in our waterways, which is really exciting. So both of you guys are definitely on the same page. He's doing
Yeah.
the farming, and then you are sharing his efforts, and those like him that choose to farm a different way, maybe the OG
Right.
way.
Right. um, that's so important. So people like Eric are so important in our efforts in farming for public health. I'm not an agronomist. I'm not a farmer. I am someone who works in public health, trying to, connect this message that I think is a very public health centered message to all of us in Iowa. This is all Iowans, right? This is our home. We're very, very familiar with the fact that we are a rural state that uh, relies very heavily on agriculture as an economic input, right? So And as residents of the state, it's really important to understand what is happening around us, and how it impacts our home. And knowing that there are alternatives to the status quo, I think is important in all of us, moving forward and maybe asking for change.
Sure. So, what are some ways that we'll go with inspire? What are some ways that you inspire people to take note of how their food is grown and just kind of what happens? Because a lot of us are pretty far removed from the agronomy side of it. We just eat the food that ends up on our plate or that we pick out at the grocery store or the farmer's market. How do you raise awareness and how do you inspire change?
Well, we really try to tell those stories about farmers like Eric. We, just like in Good Neighbor, Iowa, we don't take a finger wagging approach like, oh, you should be doing this better. Really, it's finding those innovative farmers or those engaged citizens who are sharing on their platforms better visions for Iowa. And alternate practices that improve soil quality, improve water quality, promote biodiversity, promote diversity of crops and yields, in order to, really provide an example for what could be a local food system, but also sort of the foundation for the national and global food system. So Iowa really, based on the crops that we produce, Iowa really is ground zero for the food system that we have today, right? We produce these just staggering amounts of these commodity crops, corn and soy, that goes to, either fuel cars, for ethanol, or fuel the animal industry as animal feed. When I was little, I would look around and I would really identify with being an Iowan as a place and as a resident of a state that feeds the world. But I would look around and I would think, I'm definitely not eating this much corn. Who's eating this much corn? Not really even putting together that, humans aren't eating the crops that we grow here. I've sort of gone on a little digression there, but we think about Iowa as this like ground zero for the food system. But what exactly is the food system that we are promoting? Is it one that is helpful to humans, harmful to humans? Is it staying local? Is it supporting other states, I don't even know what I'm trying to say here, nations far, far away.
Sure.
We're not really keeping things local that support, Iowa's local economy or Iowa's local food system.
No, definitely. And that's something that's been covered in other episodes prior as well, where we think that all of the honey that is being cultivated locally is staying in Iowa. It's not. And Iowa's bees are not even staying in Iowa. Iowa's bees are going to California and then they're going to Montana, and then they're coming back. Like we've created this global. I know we've created this global network that all of our food, unless you're getting it at the farmer's market or direct from the farmer or maker, you kind of don't know the path that it took. And maybe some of that corn that we've grown here ends up in, I don't know, some form of corn-based tortilla or chip. Maybe it ends up back on our plates somehow, but who's to say where it actually goes? And I think a lot of people have noticed through the struggles of this year with COVID that Iowa's ground zero kind of position has put a lot of people and a lot of things in jeopardy, unfortunately, especially with our meat packing plants here as well. A whole lot was uncovered in this year.
Right. I think uncovered is a really good word for it, Julia. COVID didn't really cause any of these problems to occur in the food system. It really just highlighted the shortcomings of a system that we had been, relying on for the past who knows how long.
Right.
It's sort of like how, you can think of climate change as a risk modifier. You can consider COVID sort of a systems, it shows the shortcomings, doesn't create the shortcomings
Sure.
of the system. Yeah.
Most definitely. I think the meat, yeah. I mean, of course, unfortunately, Tyson was in there, and I know you are plant-based, and I am mostly plant-based, so that wasn't as much of an issue for us, but for a lot of other people and a lot of other industries, it really was. Now, since you work more with farmers, did you notice or did you hear about, or you took trips to farms previously before COVID? I'm assuming those field trip days are not happening, but maybe you heard from some of your local farm contacts. Were they successfully able to, the over repeated P word, pivot? Were they able to pivot with COVID? How did we set ourselves up for success or failure this year?
Right. Well, I think what became really obvious with COVID and meat packing was this issue that we have with market concentration. So a lot of our local producers, when it came to, butchering or processing their meat, really have not a lot of places to go because there aren't very many independent meat packing plants. Unless you're selling to Tyson or JBS or some large corporation, or are contracted with some of these large corporations, you really don't have a place for your meat to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then these independent lockers, which we don't have a lot of in the state or even nearby, were then so quickly booked up that I know some farmers aren't able to get in to process their meat until early next spring, even. It's just so backed up right now. But yeah, we're running into this, or again, COVID is exposing this issue that we have in our food system when it comes to meat production, and it's this market concentration problem. We have a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, we have a few very large corporations who are controlling the meat supply, and that's sort of the fallout of that is showing up in unfortunate ways, right? Where farmers aren't able to pivot in the ways that they'd like to.
Sure. And I think you highlighted a really, really excellent point, too, that those of us who were just kind of watching the news, absorbing what was going on, or trying to figure out, like, okay, why is this perhaps going to be an issue? It wasn't necessarily getting meat on our plate. It was the fact that the meat was not able to be processed, or that our local farmers were not getting, as you kind of indicated, the priority, or the independent lockers were not able to keep up as much as the larger ones, or the farmers that were selling to the larger lockers that would eventually go into more commercial processed meat. We're talking about meat a lot on this episode. This is like really rare so far. We talked about Eric's lambs, but that was about it.
Well, and that's the funny thing too. I'm so far removed from meat processing plants, except to see sort of the fallout of market concentration locally.
Sure.
I mostly work with disseminating research when it comes to commodity crops, right? So, what does it look like how does it improve the land or help yield outcomes or pest suppression when, for example, you add a third crop rotation or extend a crop rotation 3 or 4 years? What does it do to chemical inputs if you should, employ some of these other tools, right, in the tool belt? So that's mostly the type of work that I'm doing, really trying to connect the dots for farmers, for public health practitioners, that there are a multiplicity of goods that come from being able to work more with the land and more with these agronomic solutions to pests or for nutrients in the soil and whatnot. So yeah, even that being said, meat packing is not on my list of things that I communicate a ton with. So I probably spoke way out of turn with all of the stuff I was saying.
That's okay. Truly, that's one of those things in Iowa where we're at. And you grew up not too far away. Is that correct? Not in Cedar Falls, but
I grew up in Vinton.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, fun. Cool. I did not know this about you, my dear. Super. It's worth mentioning that Audrey and I knew each other before this podcast. So if we seem very familiar, we are. But that's one thing I love about our community here, too, is that we get to know so many people that run in the same circles. And yeah, so far Eric's been mentioned in 2 or 3 podcasts because he's so connected with you guys in the Iowa Food Program and Single Speed being in their kitchen. And it's just an excellent, wonderful community that we have here. And I'm very thankful for it.
So am I. So am I. Iowa is sort of the example. It's like the manifestation of it's a small world.
Oh my gosh. Indeed. 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 So again, we've mentioned several times that COVID has really changed the way you operate and inspire. What did the field trips to local farms used to look like? Would you lead them, or would the farmers lead them?
So they're farmer-led. We would partner with Practical Farmers of Iowa to put together these field days, and they would help us sort of choose a catalog of farmers that were really embodying the principles of farming for public health. And we would then share these particular field days with public health professionals, so individuals that were more traditionally aligned with the public health field, who worked maybe in county public health departments or in public health departments in hospitals. But then we would also extend these invitations to join these field days to people who I would consider more adjacent or allied public health professionals.
Okay.
Which, by the way, is a very broad group of people because public health is a team sport, right?
For sure.
So even if you're not working in a traditionally public health field, you're probably doing public health. So that would include folks from soil and water conservation districts or people in water utilities, those who would have a vested interest in downstream implications of how land is treated. So we would try to really broaden the viewpoint of all of these individuals to really consider farming as a tool in their toolbox for addressing some of the issues that they face in their communities, or with whatever it is that they're working on, be it water or soil or erosion or eutrophication of streams, maybe toxic algal blooms, or maybe it's pesticide drift or application exposure in populations from a more traditional public health perspective.
Sure. And you'd mentioned earlier, I liked the way you put it as well. And you just said an additional thing with water, you take an upstream approach. Right. And I love that. But it really does, because anything that is done at the top or anything before, it affects everything that comes after it. And that's not always considered. As you said, too, it's preventative. It's not curative. And I mean, and you can speak on more to this than I can, I'm sure, as it's your job. It's not my job. I get to talk to all the cool people doing the cool stuff.
Well, I feel like I become so repetitive when I talk about this, because I probably overuse the analogy of water, right? Streams, upstream, downstream. I'm constantly repeating those words. But it is one of, I feel like, the most parallel analogies to the work that it is that we're doing. And it's just a very, very easy way for a lot of people, and I think especially Iowans, because we're acutely aware of how our water is impacted by agriculture. I feel as though that, that's just an analogy that works.
Mm-hmm. Oh, most definitely. Well, and then pesticide drift, as you said, too, unfortunately, it is directly connected to the water.
Yeah. Right. So, and we're starting to understand a little bit more about that too.
Yes. So with that, and again, I know you are not doing the soil studies, you are not doing the water studies, but what you have been able to deduce from all of these research and findings that you've participated in, what are some of the main things that you would highlight that is destroying the environment and destroying human public health that we could omit if we lessened the use or omitted the use entirely of pesticides? Loaded.
Yeah. So I think that Oh, I gotta figure out how to answer this, Julia.
I asked the hard ones. Oh no. Usually the hardest question is what do you like to eat? And I might
The
ask
very
you
end.
that later,
I was
but
bracing myself for that. That one's gonna feel easy compared to this one.
yes.
Well, I think that, pesticide use and application uh, is more of a reactionary practice now. I feel as though, the herbicide use in the state is, um, yeah, I like the word reaction. It's really a reaction from our growers to the problems that they're facing in the field, right? Um, I don't know if you're familiar with the term pesticide treadmill.
Oh, I'm not. Do explain.
So it can refer to two things. And in this context, I'm using the term to describe when you hop on a treadmill and you have to sort of keep walking in order to keep up with the with the
Oh,
belt,
sure.
right? And so every season, as the growing season begins, we're faced with the same set of problems that force us to fall back onto a set of tools that we've been handed. And in this case, herbicides, for example. You can use this example for a number of different chemical inputs, but pesticides makes the word pesticide treadmill is a term that's pretty common. So you sort of you're forced to continue to use a set of practices because the system is set up for you to use them. Pesticide treadmill is also used in the context of chemical replacements. So say, for example, we move from a class of really, really harmful insecticides, realize that they're very, very harmful, stop using them, replace all of them with a new class of insecticides, find out later that they're harmful, replace that, so that's a different type of treadmill. Chemical whack-a-mole is a better
Oh,
term for that one.
sure. Okay. Oh my gosh. What is the lesser evil? Okay, we tried this. This is no good. Okay, let's try this. Oh, that's no good over here.
The
Oh my
lesser
goodness.
evil, I think, of all of this is a change in the paradigm where the burden of proof is not on, bodies of water, on soil microbiotic communities, or, humans to prove that they're being harmed by these chemicals. But the burden of proof should be on the chemical companies or the chemical producers to prove that they're safe before they're being put into the environment.
That's a knowledge bomb right there, girl. Yes. And that's even more upstream than the farmers, is even having these pesticides available in place and being able to prove that they are not going to cause harm, again, preventative, as opposed to then finding out later that they are causing harm and then having to find an alternative or a cure. Oh, my goodness. So how do we take responsibility for that? I mean, you've indicated that it's going to be up to pesticides and fertilizer and what shall we call them? Additives, soil additive based companies. We'll just broad term that. Do we put that in their hands? Do we put that in the farmer's hands? Do we put that in the consumer's hands? Like, where can we go with this?
Right.
Or all three.
Right. Right. Well, there are so many different points of intervention for this the spectrum of issues that we have in agriculture, local agriculture. And in Iowa, local agriculture is going to be that commodity crop agriculture. So not to be confused with local food production.
Nope. Yes.
But local agriculture. And so I feel as though there are actions that we can take on a variety of different levels, from policies to farmers to policymakers to farmers to consumers. I would say that, from the consumer standpoint, listen to this podcast, right? This is a perfect example of the kind of action that you can take as a consumer, is really to understand the landscape of issues that surround what farming is locally. How does it butt up against a consumer's perception of, what they think is going on in the food system versus what the reality is, and really understanding your place, where you live, what your home is, and what are the issues impacting your home. So, for example, maybe you live in a community that has excessively high nitrate levels in your drinking water, right? And that you get notices from your water department saying, telling you what the nitrate levels are. Understanding that nitrates comes from agricultural runoff is an entry point for a consumer to become more aware of how the land impacts their health, right? And then maybe from there, they explore, well, what exactly is being grown? What is that commodity being used as an ingredient for? Does any of that actually come to me or my plate? If it doesn't, how can I change my behavior so I support practices that not only support local farmers that grow food that I can eat, but also will help clean up our water? So I think that education is the first step to really taking better actions that improve your, what's on your plate and improve the environment around your home and in your community. And then also that supports, local farmers. But I mean, if we want to talk about policy implications, if we want to talk about strategies for farmers, I think that starts to, push the scope of this conversation.
Sure. And after all of what you just said, I am a person that is very, very ready to admit when they did not know something that perhaps they should have or they wished they would have known. And in talking to you here too, you drive down the highway in Iowa and you go down 20 or you go down, what are we taking in Des Moines? 35. And you're going through these commodity farms. And this is one thing that has not crossed my mind, that it is, and if you're listening and you're like, Julia, you dummy, you host this podcast. Hey guys, still learning right along with the rest of you. And maybe I knew this at one point in time, but the whole thought that what is being grown here, what's affecting our land, what's affecting our waterways, again, it's going elsewhere. Like I'm familiar, I have several friends that are farmers, and the farms that you see at the local farmers markets here too, and those are clearly here and those are benefiting our community. And then you think about all of the cornfields and all the soybean fields that you see that are not. And that is, I'm having a response to it right now, Audrey. I'm having a visceral response of just a realization, or even, things that things that you think but you never question it because those farms have always been there. I drive to Des Moines, I drive to Dubuque, I drive to Vinton, and I see all of these fields. And you just kind of, I don't know, I never thought about where those fields were sending their crops, and they are the gigantic, massive commercial farms, not necessarily our small local friends. And so, guys, here we go. Here's how change is made. You hear something, it challenges you, it makes you angry. I almost had to give ourselves an explicit label on the podcast.
Well, I think too, I mean, you're touching on this, we're very, very linear thinkers as consumers, right? I go into the grocery store, I see, I don't know, a pack of pasta on the shelf, and I think like, oh, this is where pasta comes from, right?
The box.
But I don't think about, where the wheat is grown. I don't think about, the farming practices. I don't think about the size of the farm. I don't think about how far away it was, or, what transportation I had to take to get to the supermarket that I'm shopping. But when we start to employ a more systems thinking approach, we start asking ourselves all of those questions, right? And you start asking yourself these questions not only when you're in the supermarket, but when you're driving down 20 or on 35 and you notice all of the corn and all of the soy. And then you think, well, what is being grown? Where does it go? What else is required to grow it? Who is growing it? Are they being paid enough? And how am I either supporting this system or supporting a better system? And what do those two different actions look like? And how can I practice that every day?
For sure.
So really, it is a shift in thinking than how we as consumers are used to thinking and operating as consumers in the food system.
I love all of this. All of this. I'm still just like mind boggled right now. And oh, man, guys. Yes. Mic drop for Audrey. Goodness.
Oh my gosh.
Gracious.
You're very nice to me, Julia.
No, it's something not thought about. And with previous guests too, and we've talked about coffee and sourcing coffee. And that I feel like is almost, I don't know why that seems to be more of a tangible thing, or something that we would care more about, is if, the coffee fields and their workers were being treated fairly, because we're aware of fair trade and direct trade when we're dealing with other countries too, especially making sure that, the US isn't just doing that thing that they do sometimes and taking advantage of other cultures. Did I say that? I did. I'm sorry. But you kind of forget that happens in our own state too. And I mean, poor Iowa and the Midwest as well, with all of its agriculture.
Right. I really do feel as though when there is like environmental or climate health issues, it boils down to an environmental justice issue, right? I think that justice is becoming a focal point. Finally, thank goodness.
We're getting there.
In our society, in our culture, we're very aware of injustices in certain areas of our society and in culture right now. I think that expanding the justice lens to food, and then trying to find how justice and food intersect with Iowa, I don't think you have to look very far, right? I think that we can ask all of the same questions that we ask about our fair trade coffee or our fair trade or organic produce that comes from outside of the state. We can ask those same questions of things that we do here or that we grow here. Are people making a living wage in producing this commodity crop? Like everyone who is impacted or who is involved in this supply chain, say when it comes to corn, for example, or to hogs, is everyone being treated fairly, equitably? I think, just we can apply this same justice lens to the food system here close to home.
Sure. We just don't always think about it because we don't always think about it.
And I think too, we don't know enough about the process to ask certain questions,
right?
Because in order to ask those questions about the pasta, in that pasta example I gave earlier, you have to know that pasta is made out of wheat.
Sure.
You have to know that we don't grow a ton of wheat in Iowa, right? So you have to be able to put some pieces together about the food system and about agriculture generally to be able to be more critical about it. And that's where the education portion comes in.
And this is, so you've started to teach, is it a class with Kamyar, who you mentioned before?
Yeah, so we're teaching an honors capstone that we're calling Food and Farming and Public Health in Iowa, where we touch a lot of what we're talking about here today, with justice being one of the main focal points in how we talk about food and food justice as well, climate change and how public health is all intertwined in all of it.
Excellent. And I wish I had had that class. I actually remember when, I don't remember what year it was, and I'm afraid I don't remember the class either, but I remember going to tour the CEEE building when I was like in elementary or junior high. It was a field trip when it was like first constructed. And first of all, I remember I was clearly young enough that this building left an impression on me. Like you have the big, what do I want to call it, atrium lobby in the middle, and you just look up, and I must have been young because I remember thinking it was really big. And then
it's still big, Julia.
It's still big. Freshman year, actually, we had all of our music classes in the CEEE building because the music building was under construction. So, fun fact, took classes in there, but they were music theory, not your class. Though I wish they had it, and I'm glad you're teaching that, and I'm glad the CEEE building is continuing to evolve, and more and more programs are coming from it because, like you said, I mean, I just had a whole lot of knowledge bombs dropped on me during this podcast, and it's one thing to hear information about it, but then to internalize it and have it create change in the way you think, and then in the way you act, and then maybe sharing that information with others. So with these college kids that are taking your class, I mean, hopefully that leaves a mark and creates a change for generations to come on being more informed on the food process and food justice, which is maybe one of my new favorite terms. It's a perfect way to say it, and something that, you know, I hadn't previously encountered, and I'm sure some of our listeners haven't either. And it's hard when there's so much stuff to care about and to think about and to learn about, that you just come across it when you do.
There's so many things to care about these days.
So many. So many. Well, what are some of your, and the programs, we can cite personal goals and program goals once all this COVID shenanigans clear up and you can have people out to farms? What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, this is
loaded.
Again, yeah, loaded. These are some loaded questions, Julia. Well, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned at the CEEE is to manage my own expectations for the timeline in which things get done.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to the culture of farming in Iowa, just like the culture of lawns in the United States, like we were talking about earlier with Good Neighbor Iowa, my time scale, my expectation for when we can realistically see change is on the longer term.
Mm-hmm.
So my goals for the next few years are to really continue to try to make our message more mainstream, right? That farming is public health,
mm-hmm.
and that we can be farming in a way that not only improve yield, productivity, but also improves the quality of water and soil across the state. So I think that that's one of my larger goals moving forward. And then also to really, again, highlight the good actors in this work. You know, again, I'm not a farmer, I'm not an agronomist, I'm not a researcher, but I am very well connected to researchers, agronomists, farmers who are doing all this work that is really, really important. I feel like most of my job is just being a cheerleader or just being a mouthpiece to get the mainstream more tapped into the good work that's happening, all the good news that's happening in Iowa.
Sure. And we get a lot of bad news. We get the information. Well, I mean, we get all of the bad news. But in Des Moines, the capital of Iowa, a few years ago, they really kind of came under fire for, I think, was it nitrates in their water?
So the Des Moines Waterworks lawsuit?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that really sort of put Iowa on the map for like this issue that we have with nutrients in water, right? We've had the nutrient reduction strategy is something that was, highlighted, or I keep using that word, but, it's just a lot of attention was drawn to the fact that we have this nutrient runoff issue. And so I think that when public health practitioners think about farming, they immediately see the connection to water and human health. But there are so many other points of intersection where farming impacts humans. And I'm just trying to broaden that understanding a little bit.
Sure, most definitely. And I'm loving the use of highlighted and upstream. And like maybe, if we graphed all of the words that we've said in this episode so far, those would pop out as like the biggest ones on those, like
word cloud.
The word cloud, that's what it is. But really, that's kind of what I'm trying to do, what we are trying to do with this podcast, and what you're trying to do with the Farming for Public Health, is that there's only so much we can do as consumers on the ground level as far as, yes, purchasing power. It is a whole lot, spending your dollars for things that you want to support and not things that you don't want to support or see continue. But it is going higher and more upstream and realizing, what the actual problems are. And it's unfortunately, it's the rock and the hard place. It's the system and the situation that we've gotten ourselves into with the commercial farming and the use of pesticides and having to keep up with supply and demand. I feel like I come back to this like every other episode, but it really is. We have to keep up to feed everybody, and no person deserves to go hungry. And we have to figure out how to make that transition and still meet the necessary food amount. I mean, there's a whole lot of food waste, but we got to make sure we channel the food to the places it's supposed to be going.
Right. I think that we hear a lot about the shortcomings of the food system in terms of distribution, right?
Sure.
There are people going hungry on this planet. But we are producing more than enough calories to feed everyone on the planet. So, where is the mismatch here? Where are we falling short? So I think that, you're right on in asking, like what are the actual problems that need to be addressed? Like what questions should we be asking, but what answers are we giving that aren't really lining up to those answers or those questions? Yeah. And I should say too that, I think that on first blush, farming for public health can seem very, very critical of Iowa farmers. And I think that, that's something that, fresh out of undergrad, Audrey would have been incredibly critical of farmers because she hadn't quite screwed on her systems thinking cap yet, right? But, I think that the system that we have created in which farmers find themselves doing what it is that they're good at, doing what they love, farming, right? They are doing exactly what is being asked of them, right? And so, again, I think that there is a huge role for consumers to sort of vote with their dollar and with their action to support a system that we would much prefer and that farmers would love to fill, right? They are doing exactly what it is that we are asking of them downstream, right? Where we intersect the food system at our plates.
I think that's a wonderful, wonderful note too, because yes, and when, we set out to start this podcast too, I think one of my taglines requested was, I would rather tell you what I'm for than what I'm against, because there's a lot of backlash and a lot of guilt and what you said finger wagging. I would say finger pointing, but a lot of finger wagging, like you should be doing this differently. You should be doing this better. But yeah, they really are only just doing what has been asked of them and what is required to keep our food supply as high as it needs to be. And that was interesting that you said calories. We are creating enough calories.
Yeah.
But there's a disconnect between what's getting delivered where.
Exactly. So, I mean, we are growing calorically so much in grains, right? But if we're diverting those grain calories to ethanol, right, people aren't going to be eating that, for example.
Sure.
Or if we're diverting a lot of those calories to animal production, a lot of those calories are going to get diluted through animals. And, you're not going to get as much bang for your buck if you're eating a chicken breast versus, eating a head of broccoli, right? There's just fewer steps those calories those sun calories, right? So, right, because all of our energy comes from the sun.
Yep.
Eating lower on the trophic level is going to just inherently make you a more efficient eater.
Sure.
Right. So you're not diluting those calories. That's what I meant.
I love that. Thank you for explaining that, because I understood what you were saying and I could see this picture in my mind, but the way you described it was absolutely perfect.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. All right. So the hardest question, though, I threw you a couple loaded ones and you answered them with such ease.
Oh, I'm glad you think so.
Oh, no, it was wonderful. It's a loaded thing. And, with our episode here, I found myself asking questions for me, too, because my interest has been sparked. And those were coming from me. I was a little selfish on some of those questions because I wanted to know more. But
you should be more selfish more often. You ask great questions.
Oh, wait, thank you. I try. But the one everyone finds the hardest, which hopefully you have ease around now. What's your favorite thing to eat? What can we find you eating or drinking?
Yeah. Well, you know what? Because I am such a fan of your podcast, I have had plenty of time to think about how I would answer this. And I have recently discovered golden kiwis. They were at the Natural Grocers here in Cedar Rapids, and they were massive. So I picked up a few. I've tried to make my diet as diverse as possible. I try like a lot of different fruits and vegetables whenever I can. And these golden kiwis were nothing like the normal green kiwis that I had eaten.
Really?
They were heavenly. Oh, yes. So I think right now that's my favorite food.
Golden kiwis. Okay. We have a natural grocers here in Cedar Falls as well. So I'm going to have to check that out.
Tell me what you think.
Golden kiwis. I will. I will post it on social media after I eat them even. The people want to know, how are the golden kiwis? Oh my goodness. And then the follow-up question that usually people find a little bit easier. What advice do you have for consumers? How can we best help support your farming for public health mission?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I'm going to keep plugging this podcast. I really think that becoming more connected with knowing what's going on in your food system, what's going on in your home, in your community is very, very important for the mission of Farming for Public Health. I think that knowing or becoming more connected with your farmer, the people that grow your food, eating more locally, choosing to keep your dollars in the community that support these local food systems. And then also, again, being more efficient with your calories in terms of that trophic level, right? So eat more plants, eat more plants. Iowa has many beautiful, beautiful, productive, well-supported vegetable farms. And that, I think, is a really key part in growing a more strong vegetable infrastructure and local food economy in the state of Iowa. So I think finding those local vegetables, finding those local foods, knowing your farmer, knowing the issues that surround agriculture, those are all my suggestions for you. And ask questions. Ask questions like Julia.
Ask questions like Julia. We're going to get t-shirts made like that. No, that's a little self-indulgent. I don't think I'm actually an introvert. If anybody knows me outside of this podcast, I'm extremely friendly and bubbly, but having my name on a t-shirt might be pushing boundaries. Oh my gosh, I love it. Audrey, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so informative for me, and I know it's been informative or will be informative when this episode is released in a couple weeks here. And we can find more information at farmingforpublichealth.org. And you guys have a newsletter that people can subscribe to when the field days eventually start happening again.
Yes, we'll have all that information on our website for people to check out, as well as a lot of different and local articles about agriculture across the state, and local and not local studies, but studies that people can learn more about the ins and outs of sustainable agronomy. We love to plug the researchers doing the cool work. And then you can also find out more about the CEEE as a whole and the cool work that our center is doing at CEEE, so CEEE at .uni.edu.
Excellent. Yay. Thank you so much. And a quick note to, our local ones too in the Midwest, or if you have, we had snow today, guys. If you have the weather that's threatening your farmers markets, there have been many alternatives put in place for seasonal vegetation as well. I know the Waverly Farmers Market here in Iowa is going to have an indoor option, or I think it was going to be an online request and pickup option. So you can still support your local farmers going into the winter. You just have to take that extra step to figure out how you can still buy from them, where to go, or where to order and pick up. So check that out, guys, and I will see you next time.